Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, Isabella, for sharing the main findings of your report, which adds important details and different angles, both reinforcing or complementing the most recent findings of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency Roma Survey of 2021. When it comes to accessing rights and public services, there is evidence huge gaps between Roma and the general population. And just to recall briefly the main findings from FRA, on average, 80% of Roma in the survey countries were at risk of poverty in 2021. And this has not changed since 2016, the previous survey of FRA. On average, 48% of Roma lived in households facing severe material deprivation. By comparison, the EU average for material deprivation is only 6%. So from 6% to 48%, it's quite a gap. 82% of Roma lived in overcrowded households. And let's not forget something that has not changed since very long. Roma populations have a significantly lower life expectancy than the general population. In Europe, estimated to be between 5 and up to 15 years less than the average. Now, at the conference in Cluj last year in October, organized by the European Environmental Bureau in cooperation with ERGO, we've heard of quite at length a number of testimonies and descriptions of the situation in Pataret, a segregated Roma community nearby the Cluj-Napoca's city's garbage hole, which is deeply unjust for those people. They live segregated in appalling conditions, excluded from society, and oftentimes, as it is also the case there, in a situation which is hazardous for their health and development and well-being. The severe material and housing deprivation have a strong impact on access to essential services and rights. And all these limitations are very deeply influencing the life perspectives of Roma and are unequivocally rooted in racism and its varied forms and expressions and manifestations, also known as anti-Gypsyism and anti-Roma discrimination. Anti-Gypsyism being as a root cause and the main obstacle for Roma inclusion is already acknowledged also by the EU Roma Strategic Framework and the Council recommendation. There is undeniable evidence of the intrinsic nature and relationship between the environmental living conditions and their overarching impact on one's life prospects. As most of you know, in October 2020, new EU Roma Strategic Framework was adopted. It's a renewed and strengthened framework built on a comprehensive three-pillar approach on equality, inclusion, and participation, and includes within its 7 objectives, the objective 1, which is of paramount importance. It's fighting and preventing anti-Gypsyism and discrimination against Roma. Objective 2, reducing poverty and social exclusion, and Objective 3, promoting participation of Roma. These 3 objectives are horizontal ones and apply or should be embedded in all measures and interventions in all the other areas. So the new framework retains and continues the more traditional areas of intervention in education, employment, health, and housing. This new framework was strengthened by the unanimously adopted Council recommendation on Roma equality, inclusion, and participation, adopted in March 2021. And while building on the blueprint of the EU Roma Strategic Framework, this Council recommendation, which is the very political commitment of member states themselves, includes and proposes a wide range of measures for each of the areas covered by the framework. And to assist member states in designing and implementing the national Roma strategic frameworks, the Commission has provided guidance, including on how to better meet emerging challenges and deliver environmental justice. And this is the key part, which is of direct relevance for our today's discussion. As I've learned when I joined the Commission, this small part, although very important, was introduced thanks to the work and advocacy of ERGO and the European Environment Bureau, and that's very important. It's a good milestone and a strong basis to build upon. As Isabella also mentioned, there are not necessarily very direct correlations to environmental justice or environmental racism. Most are rather indirect, but are nevertheless of very direct relevance. And the most directly relevant parts of the EU Roma Strategic Framework and the Council recommendation in this regard is obviously fighting anti-gypsies, but in particular access to adequate disaggregated housing and essential services. And it's written there, member states should ensure equal treatment of Roma people in access to adequate disaggregated housing and essential services, including by means of measures such as the following. Measures to ensure access to essential services such as tap water, safe and clean drinking water, adequate sanitation, waste collection and management services, environmental services, electricity, gas, transport, financial services and digital communications, and physical infrastructure, and also to safeguard continuity of basic utility services, both under normal conditions and during pandemics, ecological catastrophes, and other crises. Our first communication assessment report, adopted January last year, 2023, shares its main findings, which indicate that significant gaps still exist and that member states should make more efforts and be more ambitious in their objectives and targets in a number of areas, including in the area of educational and spatial segregation of Roma, which is of direct relevance for our today's discussion. Also, it underlines the importance to ensure stronger links between the efforts to tackle anti-gypsies and the inclusion measures. Member states are strongly encouraged to make a full use of existing EU financial instruments under the Cohesion Policy Programming 2021-2027, such as the ESF+, the European Regional Development Fund, and the Resilience and Recovery Facility. There are other EU initiatives and programs of relevance from this perspective of environmental justice. And I would mention the European Green Deal, which is one of the 6 priorities of the European Commission, together with a Europe fit for the digital age and its related strand for an economy that works for people. Connected to these priorities is also the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which provides quite financial support, a substantial financial support to member states to implement ambitious reforms and investments, which include also to make their economies and societies more sustainable, resilient, and prepared for the green and digital transitions. So digital transition and the Green Deal are relevant from this perspective, although I could not very clearly identify which are the corresponding funds and financial instruments. But in connection to that, I strongly encourage everyone who's interested to find financial opportunities within these initiatives to search for the countries where you want to have specific interventions and find the calls and the financial instruments which are developed and established at national level. The Green Deal is about improving the well-being of people. It aims to protect our natural habitat and ensure that no one will be left behind. And this is a paramount principle. And no one can claim that forgetting about Roma or or not dealing with their situation of segregation is in respect with that principle. So there can be a green transition, and there cannot be a digital transition with Roma people living in secluded, segregated situations, and with their lives often being in perils because of the hazardous materials. The Green Deal is designed to protect human life. So how else if not by desegregating Roma and taking them out of these perilous situations. It is also designed to ensure that we all have cleaner air, water, and soil, as we saw in this in short clip. It's all desirable, but this can never happen in the situations of segregation, like for the community in Patarut, and many hundreds of other communities throughout Europe which live in these dire conditions. I would like to just reiterate a number of important things before concluding. There are important and quite solid EU frameworks and policies in place. There are also attached financial instruments that are supporting their implementation. Many of the national frameworks are quite aligned with these EU frameworks. Technical assistance and support is offered and provided by the European Commission to member states, provided that they are requesting for such. And what really remains is for the member states to make a best use of all these frameworks and financial opportunities and knowledge and assistance that is provided to them. Also to support the implementation of the national Roma strategic frameworks, and to support the implementation of the mainstream cohesion policies. And obviously, those programs that are implementing the principles and priorities in the area of Green Deal transition and digital transition. Indeed, participation of Roma is, as I mentioned, one of the cross-cutting and horizontal objectives, but also a very important principle. Without a genuine participation of Roma, we risk ending up in situations that we've seen previously, where strategies and measures and interventions are not necessarily and sufficiently aligned with the needs and interests of Roma, as they know the situation, and they live in situations that are, affected by lack of access to rights, services, and they are impacted also by discrimination. So their participation is essential in all processes, and this is strongly underlined in our policy frameworks, but also in our assessment, and it's going to be featured again in the upcoming report. Their involvement is required from the initial stages of consultations, dialogue about what needs to be done, but then later on, as in a logical sequence, in the process of designing these policies or measures or actions or interventions, then actively contributing to support the implementation of all this, also essentially to be part of these processes of monitoring the implementation and evaluating how it was implemented and what kind of outcomes they produced, and also for the final reports, which will stay as evidence and strong reference for local and national authorities, but also Europe-wide. So In the EU Roma Strategic Framework and Council recommendation, one of the important ways to do this is mentioned in connection with the role of the National Roma Contact Point. These NRCPs are expected to either establish, if in case they do not exist, or to reform and consolidate the so-called national Roma platforms. So national Roma platforms or any equivalent processes or structures are expected to fulfill the following. Together with the NRCP, who's coordinating the process, and representatives of sectoral ministries, as well as representatives of equality bodies, and to the extent possible, representatives from local authorities. The Roma NGOs, Roma organizations in these national Roma platforms are supposed to secure their participation in the implementation of these national Roma strategic frameworks, as well as in the process of working closely with all these stakeholders, as well as with the managing authorities of EU funding instruments, to make sure that this cohesion policy funding instruments are embedding the needs and challenges of Roma in the ESF Plus, in the ERDF, in the Recovery and Resilience Facility national programs. So the strongest way, in our view, is to make sure that these national Roma platforms are really active, are really strengthened. Roma organizations have also a responsibility to be proactive towards the national Roma contact points and remind them of their duty, as it is mentioned in the EU Roma Strategic Framework and Council recommendation, but also to make a full use of the funding that we are providing to support the strengthening, the reforming, and the consolidation of these national Roma platforms. Every 2 years, under the SERV call, which is Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values, it's a funding program under the Directorate for Justice and Consumers. National Roma contact points are provided with funding specifically for this purpose. As Isabella also mentioned briefly, we are currently preparing the communication reporting on the implementation by member states of their national Roma strategic frameworks. And hopefully by June this year, we will be issuing this report, which again will contain not only our main findings, but also strong guidance for member states to steer their efforts towards the ultimate goal of this decade, which is to reach the minimum targets as set by the EU level targets by 2030. Congratulations for organizing an event on this area, which is not so often covered by many other Roma events. And thank you for the opportunity.